Well, in the beginning of Petra, we all were going to a two-year Bible school, and we had come from rock and roll backgrounds. We had played rock and roll music since we were real young, and went to this Bible school, ended up there, and really felt like there was a need for a band that played hard rock music, because we knew that's the kind of music that we liked, and we knew there was a group of people out there that only liked that kind of music and wouldn't be reached by traditional church music.
I remember they did their very first gig a night that I was working at Adam's Apple, and Greg and Bob came up to me and said, "Hey, we want you to be our lead singer." And I said, "Well, why?" They said, "Because we can't sing." I thought that was a pretty good answer, but I wasn't ready to make that change yet. And then they kept sending tapes, and then when they were in Golden Voice Studios in Illinois, which you've been in before, where I remember years back with Head East.
Yeah.
And they were doing their second album, and they called me up in the middle of the night and said, "You got to come, man. You got to come." And I got on the plane the next morning. And then it was later that year I started doing touring with them in '76. Of course, we have all these war stories about the early Jesus days of, God, I mean, Bob will tell you some funny stories about some of the festivals they put on. And it was a festival, all right. I remember in '71, Bob was with a group called Dove at the time, and we were doing a thing in Fromke Park, a big outreach thing, and that's the first time I met him. And so we started to connect there. But the first record, actually, I was a part of, came out in '76. I'm not sure. I think that's when they started to record it, called "Come and Join Us," and I was a guest. Although I think they knew, and I knew at that time it would turn into that. Later that year, I started doing dates with the group. And, you know, it was a different thing back in the '70s. I mean, it was still very the ground had been not plowed. There was a lot of stone throwers that didn't want the rock and roll, why it was, you know, the devil's music. Meanwhile, thousands of kids and older people just continued to come to the Lord as a result of the music drawing them in. And then, of course, we always gave invitations, invited people to accept the Lord, and they sure did. There were very few. I mean, Petra, Amy Grant. I mean, when I remember Michael W. used to open for Petra at some of the bigger things, and of course we didn't know who these people were, you know, and I didn't have a clue, because I didn't know what Southern gospel. I didn't know what it was. I came right out of a rock thing, which you probably did too.
Same
you know,
thing.
Beatles, Kinks, Birds, Stones, whatever. And when I gave my heart to the Lord, it was like John. That's it, full speed ahead. And so we just continued to move on. But in that day, there weren't many people that would invite you to come and play. Like churches, forget it. You maybe 1 out of 100, because it was just sacrilegious. But people that had a heart for evangelism, they would set up stages or pull in flatbed trailers in parks,
In front of Walmart stores.
anywhere they could draw a
beaches.
crowd. And we get out and draw a crowd, and you know, it was rock and roll. I mean, it was pretty slamming, and as much as we could turn it up, as loud as we could get it, you know. And people would just start filing in, and then you give an invitation, they came to the Lord. Well, eventually, the churches began to realize that this was a good thing. Look, we can double our youth group overnight. We can, you know, that's very valid. So later we began to use a Billy Graham's follow-up program and get churches to do follow-up and to funnel these believers into the local churches, which then began to change the whole complexion of how they looked at this. It was like, you know, you look at it for about 10 years and you say, no, 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 and it's like, these people won't go away. It reminds me of some scriptures, you know. They just won't go away. Well, you just do what the Lord tells you. I believe, and if you follow your heart, He will make a way for your gift and call. Somewhere along the way, somebody will get it, and they started to get it.
I had a major moment with God in my life where it made a lot of sense to follow Him completely, and I restructured my whole life and said, Lord, if you want to use me in whatever way, if it's for it to be a missionary or whatever, just I'll do that. And about 2 weeks after that, I got a call from Nashville, and they heard some stuff I played on some records and wanted me to come down to Nashville and work on some projects. First day I got down here, Joe English was the project that I started with, who had left Paul McCartney and Wings, was doing his first Christian album. And by noon that day, he asked me to come down, and that's how I ended up down in Nashville. And while we were getting the band together, a friend of ours, Scott Rowley, who's a pastor now, wonderful person, he was going out to do some concerts, and he didn't have a band, so Joe and I said, well, we'll do it. And we didn't have a guitar player. And we invited Bob to play guitar. And that's when I met Bob, and we went out together. I think this could have been 1980-something, early 80s, and that's when I first met Bob, and he was just very quiet and reserved, and was just there and play. And after that point, Joe English Band went out and toured, and Petra went out and toured, and I think it was at that interim
worked
we used
together.
to bump into
Yeah, we
each
were
other
working together for a while.
concerts.
Some of those tours.
And then when they had an opening, they asked me to drop in and start playing. And that's how I ended up in Petra. I think that was 84. Yeah. I started guesting on the tour. And they said, hey, if you got some ideas, why don't we try you on some tracks for the album? And I said, okay, I'll give it a shot.
There it was.
And I started working on the album, and it worked. And from that point on, they said, well, would you like to join? And I had for a while some previous obligations with Joe. So I waited until that point was over. I said, Lord, if you want me in this position, leave it open so that I can honor the commitment I had with Joe, and at the same time, move forward to the next thing.
I joined February 3rd, 1986. I know that because that was my birthday. And what's funny is Greg, I don't know if he remembers this, but I met Greg probably years
1980.
before. Yeah. In fact, I got to hear the coloring song before it ever went on the record.
10 years before it ever went on a Petra
Yeah.
record.
And so by that time, he just joined the band when that happened, and it sort of disappeared. It was actually it was 5 years.
Was it?
Yep. And I went and started doing something else. I didn't think I'd ever sing again. The whole music thing was totally out. Went to Utah for 2 years, and the only albums I had was two Petra records, Never Say Die and War Schweiter Then. And I'd have to drive in the desert for an hour to this mine, and then drive back an hour. And every day I'd listen to those two records.
Wow.
And that's the only records I thought Petra had. Then I come back into civilization in Indiana and find out that Petra is this gigantic, hot band that's outselling, some of the biggest bands in the country. And I'm going, all right, that's very cool, But that was pretty much it. I just was very glad that Christian music was sounding like that, and they were using it the way I knew rock could be used. And I just put it sort of aside. And then one day Bob called me and said that, and I thought what my original thought was, you must have messed up your throat, and you needed to finish an album, and you knew me, and that maybe I could go in and do some background vocals for you.
That wasn't the case.
Nope. And I'll tell you what, I call up Bob, and he tried to get a hold of me, and it was a long story. I finally got a hold of him, and he says, would you consider singing for Petra? And I said, you got to be kidding me. And I said, I've been singing for 5 years. Of course, I asked where Greg was, and he says, well, we just feel that it's time we separated, and he's going to go his way, and we're going to go ours, and would you consider? I said, oh, absolutely. Yes, let's do it right now. He goes, don't you think you should pray about it? Oh, man, yes, we should pray about it. And but I knew, Doral and I both knew. I mean, because of things that had happened recently, as far as people prophesying over me and all this, I knew it was exactly what God had in store. And my biggest fear was that for the first time that I can remember, I was going on stage sober. Because in my other world, in the secular times, when Petra was out there knocking down doors, I was in the secular side having it easy. And but in that world, you're not sober. I mean, you're not sober, you're not straight, you're not anything. You do like everybody else does. And by that time, in 1980, I was a vegetable. But that's how I went on stage. 6-pack of beer, walk on stage, do my thing, come back, do the drugs that I was, always did, and until the next day. And walking on stage that night sober, I was actually fearful. I wasn't sure if I could do what I'd been doing normally for years as a sober artist. The cool part of it is you get to watch kids come forward. Not kids, their parents.
Now
Their grandparents. You get to watch people come forward, and not only have you had a fantastic time, but the whole thing ends up to a life-changing, eternal event. That is so cool. You show me a secular band that has that kind of thrill, and I'll show you a band that is probably Christian anyway. I mean, it's the only way it can be. It's just so exciting. It started with the Petra Praise record, something that we did on our own, and it was actually the only way it was going to come out is if we signed with Word. And it was sort of like a signing bonus. Okay, you sign with us, we'll put this record out for you.
And the reason for Petra Praise is as we were touring, we had these youth pastor conferences. And every time we would have them, they said, we need some youth rock worship music. We kept hearing that, and we were looking, and there wasn't very much out there. So we did that more as not an agenda to have a album product out there. It was more of a service to the Christian youth community so they could have some worship. And it would be more rock.
What's funny was the record, the Praise and Worship record was actually just a sample. The whole idea was to put out a CD that had just the music, and the choir could sing with it. The kids could sing to that music. And the CD was just a sample of what it could sound like. And then the record company goes, this sounds great. And they put it out. They decided they're going to put out that record plus the package that we originally designed. And the CD just skyrocketed. What did it feel like that in '91 when that year we won the Grammy for Beyond Belief, and then the Dove Awards, where for the first time we were actually treated like we existed, and it was like something.
It was an honor. It was a blessing.
And what's funny is Garmo and Key and us used to have this joke. We were the most nominated non-winners bands. And it's true.
Eddie DeGarmo used to always say
we
that.
wanted to have our own category. Most nominated non-winners band for 19, and so we sat there and we were nominated 5 times. There was 5 nominations for us that year, and we got 4 out of the 5, and the 5th one I still think we should have got that one too. Anyway, but after, I remember the first time with the first nomination we got, and we got the Dove first time ever. We walked up and somebody
Eddie DeGarmo.
He goes, no, we said to Eddie, we can't be in the club anymore. And then it just kept. I mean, we just kept walking up there. And then the last one we got was Artist of the Year, and that was. I think that was probably the biggest honor that we'd ever had, because no band had ever been nominated as Artist of the Year, but to win Artist of the Year over all the Sandy Pattys, the Amy Grants, all these
Great, wonderful, talented people, it was a shock.
It was absolutely one of those special nights you'll never forget. And did we feel vindicated then? Yes, absolutely.
One of my favorites, I say one of my favorites is Grave Robber, because of the hope that it brings to people that have lost loved ones, which so many of us have lost loved ones along the way. And to realize that because of that hope, and the scripture makes it plain, we're going to see them again.